My sister stood at the entrance of my luxury hotel, laughing that I couldn't afford to walk in. My mom joined her, whispering that I shouldn't embarrass the family. They had no clue I owned the entire building and everything inside it. Then my head of security stepped forward. Family arrogance always comes with a price. Can you imagine the gut punch of your own sister physically blocking you from entering a place, telling you it's too upscale for you? And then hearing your mother whisper, "Don't embarrass us," in a place I actually owned? That moment wasn't just a turning point. It was the explosive revelation of a lifetime of being underestimated. If you've ever had the people who should believe in you most doubt you instead, then hit that like button and let's talk. Because this is the story of how I, Abigail Thompson, finally showed my family the truth about who I really am. Growing up in suburban Minneapolis, I was always the odd one out. My parents, Richard and Diana, had a moderately successful accounting firm, giving us a comfortable life. But my younger sister, Stephanie, was their golden child. She was everything they valued. Pretty, popular, and always followed the traditional path. She joined cheerleading. I started a small business selling planners at 16. My parents called it a cute hobby, a distraction. "Abigail, why can't you focus on something practical?" my mother would sigh, finding me working on business plans. "Look at Stephanie. She's applying to the right colleges. That's how you get ahead." Their dismissal of my entrepreneurial spirit was constant. When I said I wanted to study hospitality management, my father's disappointment hung heavy. "Hotels? You want to be a glorified housekeeper?" he scoffed. "We didn't raise you to be a solo." Despite their disapproval, I held firm. They paid every penny for Stephanie's Ivy League business degree, but for me? I worked 3 jobs: hotel front desk in the mornings, classes in the afternoon, waitressing at night. Those years were brutal, but they taught me more than any textbook ever could. My junior year changed everything. I met Rachel Winters, a hospitality professor who saw something in me my family never did. Raw determination and an innate talent for the luxury market. "You have an eye for potential, Abigail," she told me after I presented a case study. "Most students see properties as they are. You see what they could become." Rachel's guidance led me to an internship at the Meridian Hotel Group. While other interns fetched coffee, I spent every spare moment studying their business model, finding inefficiencies, and quietly drafting proposals. One day, I accidentally left a report on James Harrison's desk, the regional director. The next day, I was called into his office, bracing for a firing. Instead, he offered me a junior management position. "This analysis is better than what I get from consultants I pay thousands for," he said, tapping my report. "We need people who think like you." When I called my parents with the news, their response was chillingly lukewarm. "Well, at least you'll have steady employment," my mother said. "Though management trainee isn't exactly executive material." Stephanie just got offered a junior analyst position at Goldman Sachs. That was it. I stopped sharing my career milestones after that. They didn't know when I became a hotel manager at 26, or when I developed a loyalty program that boosted Meridian's revenue by 15%. They certainly didn't know when I left to start my own consulting firm at 28, or when I secured enough investors to buy my first struggling property, the Athena Hotel, a year later. I poured everything into the Athena. I renovated, rebranded, and transformed it into the most exclusive boutique hotel in Minneapolis. Within 18 months, I owned a second property, then a third, and so on. By 32, I had a prestigious collection of luxury hotels across the Midwest, with the Athena as my crown jewel and personal residence. I lived in the penthouse suite right above them. My parents and Stephanie remained completely oblivious. In their minds, I was still struggling in some low-level hotel job, barely scraping by. I never corrected them, partly because they never asked, and partly because their assumptions revealed more about them than they did about me. My personal life was just as private. My closest friend became Michael Chin, the brilliant security chief I hired for the Athena, a former military intelligence officer who became my most trusted confidant. We built a friendship on mutual respect and a shared vision. I dated occasionally, but my focus remained on my empire. The hotels were my children, my staff, my extended family. The irony was not lost on me. I'd built the supportive environment my own family had failed to provide. This was the backdrop when my father's 60th birthday approached. I hadn't been home for a family gathering in nearly 2 years. But this milestone felt important. Perhaps it was a chance to bridge the gap between the person my family thought I was and the woman I'd become. What I didn't anticipate was just how spectacularly that gap would collapse. 2 months before the birthday, my mother texted the family group, planning surprise dinner for Dad's 60th. Looking at Giovanni's or the Athena Hotel restaurant. Thoughts. I nearly dropped my phone. The Athena. My Athena. For a split second I considered telling them everything. But something held me back. Maybe years of conditioning. Or perhaps the unexpected thrill of a more meaningful revelation. The Athena has a great reputation, I texted back casually. Their private dining room is supposed to be exceptional. It's very expensive, my mother replied. Probably out of our budget. And yours obviously. Ouch. But I was used to it. I could help with costs, I offered. We don't need charity, Abigail. Your sister is doing very well at her firm and has offered to cover half. We'll figure out the rest. I bit back a sarcastic response. Instead, I suggested I could look into discounts through industry connections. My mother reluctantly agreed, which was all the opening I needed. That afternoon I called Jackson Porter, my general manager at the Athena. Jackson, my family is planning my father's birthday dinner here next month. They have no idea I own the place. Seriously? He laughed. That's either cosmic irony or fantastic timing. A bit of both, I said. Here's what I need. They'll call for the Thompson party. Give them our best private dining room, the Winston Suite. Full service, premium everything. But quote them exactly half the actual cost. I'll cover the difference anonymously. And should we acknowledge you as the owner when you arrive? Jackson asked. I paused, savoring the moment. No. Treat me like any other guest initially. I'll find the right moment to reveal the truth. Over the next weeks I watched it unfold. My mother haggled, questioning the surprisingly reasonable rate. My executive chef developed a special menu. I arranged for my father's favorite wines. A week before, Stephanie called me. So you're actually coming to Dad's birthday? She sounded skeptical. Mom says you got some kind of discount at the Athena. How exactly did you manage that? It's not like you're a VIP guest there. The perfect opportunity to come clean, again. But her condescending tone made me want to wait for maximum impact. I've done some consulting work for hotel groups, I said. Vaguely. Industry courtesy, right? She didn't bother hiding her disbelief. Well, try to dress appropriately. The Athena is pretty upscale. Maybe I can lend you something. I glanced at the custom Valentino I was wearing for a business meeting and smiled. I'll manage. Just don't embarrass us, she added before hanging up. Those words would come back to haunt her. The night before the dinner, my mother called. Abigail, we've had to add a few people. The Robertsons, the Clarks, and Stephanie's bringing her new boyfriend, Derek. Very impressive. Sounds fine, I replied. The room accommodates 20. How would you know that? Her suspicion was immediate. I looked at their website. I recovered quickly. Well, with the additional guests, we're concerned about the cost, she continued. I know you offer to contribute, but we're thinking it might be best if you handle the tip for the servers instead. That way, you can participate without stretching your budget too thin. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Sure, Mom. I'd be happy to take care of the gratuity. Wonderful. And Abigail, please be punctual. Reservation is at 7 sharp. After hanging up, overlooking the Minneapolis skyline, I contemplated the evening to come. Part of me felt childish for not just telling them the truth. But another part recognized this as the perfect opportunity to address years of dismissal. I called Michael, my security chief, and outlined a plan. His deep laugh echoed. You're sure about this approach? It's a bit theatrical. Sometimes a demonstration is more effective than an explanation, I replied. Besides, they've written their own script. I'm just following their lead to its natural conclusion. As always, I've got your back, Michael assured me. Tomorrow will certainly be memorable. That night, I slept in my penthouse above the Athena, the hotel my family believed I couldn't afford to even dine in, let alone own. Tomorrow would indeed change everything. The evening of my father's birthday arrived with perfect, almost cinematic timing. A soft snowfall began, dusting the Athena's historic facade in a crystalline glow. I intentionally arrived separately, claiming a last-minute work commitment would make me slightly late. In reality, I wanted to observe their grand entrance from the hotel's security cameras. Dressed in a midnight blue Da Vinci gown, simple, elegant, unmistakably expensive, I sat in my private office, watching the monitors as my family arrived 40 minutes early. My mother, in her 10-year-old special occasion St. John's suit, immediately began inspecting everything. My father looked uncomfortable but impressed, repeatedly straightening his tie as he gazed at the restored Art Deco ceiling murals I'd commissioned. Stephanie arrived moments later with Derek, both dressed like they were attending a gala. She instantly took charge, speaking loudly to the concierge, gesturing dramatically as if she owned the place. I watched as Jackson, my GM, personally escorted them to the Winston Suite, where champagne and appetizers awaited. My mother's surprise at the lavish setup, far more than the reasonable package she'd been quoted, was evident even on the small screen. Miss Thompson, Elise, my executive chef, appeared at my door. Everything is prepared. The wine has been decanting for 3 hours, and we've included your father's favorite bourbon. Perfect, Elise. Thank you. I stood smoothing my dress. I think it's time for my entrance. As planned, I texted Michael to take his position. Then I took my private elevator, exited the hotel entirely, and walked around to approach from the main entrance like any other guest. Timing was everything. I arrived just as the last of the family friends were checking in. I stood back, watching the Robertsons and Clarks directed toward the private dining room. Just as I prepared to follow, Stephanie emerged from a hallway, presumably from the restroom. Her eyes landed on me, narrowing with immediate, familiar judgment. The smile that spread across her face wasn't friendly. It was the same condescending expression I'd seen countless times growing up. Abigail, you actually showed up. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dress, my shoes, the simple but obviously real diamond earrings. Wow, you borrowed something nice. Hello, Stephanie. You look lovely, I replied, refusing to engage. She frowned, disappointed I hadn't given her more ammunition. Mom was worried you'd back out, or show up looking like you just left work at wherever it is you're working these days. I'm exactly where I want to be career-wise, I said truthfully. Right. She glanced over my shoulder, then her eyes widened. Oh, you didn't? Please tell me you didn't bring a date to Dad's birthday. This is a family event, Abigail. I turned to see Michael entering, impeccable in his tailored suit. Before I could explain he wasn't joining us, my mother appeared beside Stephanie. Abigail, finally. We've been here for ages. She barely looked at me, her attention snapping to Michael. And who is this? We didn't arrange for extra seating. This is... I began, but Michael smoothly interjected. Good evening, Mrs. Thompson. I'm Michael Chin, head of security for the Athena Hotel. I just needed a brief word with Miss Thompson. My mother's expression shifted from irritation to pure embarrassment. Security? Abigail, what have you done now? Before I could respond, Stephanie stepped directly in front of me, physically blocking my path, as if preventing me from fleeing. Is there a problem with her reservation? Stephanie asked Michael, speaking about me as if I weren't present. We can cover her portion if that's the issue. My mother moved closer, her voice dropping to that particular whisper that somehow carried perfectly despite its lowered volume. Abigail, don't embarrass the family. If you're having financial problems again, you should have said something before coming to a place like this. The lobby had gone silent. Guests and staff paused, observing the unfolding drama. Jackson appeared near the restaurant entrance, watching with barely concealed amusement. He caught my eye. I gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Actually, Michael said, his professional tone unwavering, I wanted to inform Miss Thompson that her special requests for the evening have been arranged according to her specifications. Special requests? My mother looked confused. What special requests? Stephanie rolled her eyes. Mom, she probably asked for the cheapest wine option or something. Can we please go back to the party? Derek is telling Dad about his new BMW. She turned, attempting to guide my mother away while still blocking my path. That's when Michael cleared his throat. Loudly. Mrs. Thompson, Miss Stephanie, perhaps you're unaware that you're currently preventing the owner of this establishment from entering her own property. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother froze mid-step. Stephanie slowly turned back to me, her face caught between disbelief and dawning horror. Excuse me. My mother finally managed. Jackson chose that perfect moment to approach, extending his hand to me with practiced deference. Miss Thompson, everything is prepared for your father's celebration. The chef has included all your requested items, and the 1962 Bordeaux you selected from your personal collection is exceptional with the prime rib. My mother's face had drained of all color. Your personal collection. I smiled, finally stepping around my stunned sister. Yes, Mom. From my wine cellar here at the Athena. I've been meaning to tell you both. I own this hotel and the Meridian downtown, and 4 others across the Midwest. Stephanie's mouth opened and closed without a sound. My mother grabbed the nearest chair for support. That's not possible, she finally whispered. And yet here we are. I gestured toward the restaurant. Shall we join Dad and the others? I believe we have a celebration to continue. As we walked toward the private dining room, the hotel staff we passed all greeted me by name, with the respect reserved for not just any owner, but one they genuinely admired. Good evening, Miss Thompson. Lovely to see you, Miss Thompson. A symphony of recognition that made denial impossible. Just before entering the Winston suite, Stephanie grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. "Why didn't you tell us?" she hissed, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. I looked at her hand until she released me, then straightened my sleeve before meeting her eyes. "You never asked," I said simply. "None of you ever asked." Then I pushed open the doors to greet my surprised father, whose expression shifted from confusion to astonishment as the staff welcomed me not as a guest, but as their boss. The evening had only just begun. The remainder of my father's birthday dinner played out like a surreal drama, where half the cast had been given an entirely different script. My father, initially shocked into silence, recovered more quickly than my mother or sister. His surprise slowly transformed into something resembling pride as the evening wore on. "So this is why you've been so secretive about your work," he said during a quiet moment by the dessert table. "You own this entire place? This one and several others?" I confirmed, watching his eyes widen further. "Why keep it from us?" There was genuine confusion in his voice, without the usual defensive edge. I chose my words carefully. At first, it was because I wasn't sure I'd succeed. Then, when I did, it became clear that you all had a fixed idea of who I was and what I was capable of. After a while, it just seemed easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe. He nodded slowly, looking troubled. "I suppose we haven't given you much reason to share your successes." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of their dismissive treatment I'd ever received from any family member. Before I could respond, my mother approached, her social mask firmly back in place. "Abigail, the Clarks are asking about the historical photographs in the hallway. Since you apparently know everything about this place, perhaps you could enlighten them." Her tone was brittle, her smile fixed. As I excused myself, I overheard my father asking her, "Did you have any idea about this?" "Of course not," she replied tersely. "She's deliberately kept us in the dark to create this spectacle." The evening continued in this vein. My mother maintained a rigid pleasantness, shooting me looks that fluctuated between disbelief and betrayal. Stephanie oscillated between awkward attempts to align herself with my newfound status and sullen withdrawal. My father grew increasingly fascinated with each revelation about my business empire. By the time the custom bourbon caramel cake was served, the party had effectively split. Those who found my success intriguing, and those who found it threatening. The Robertsons and Clarks peppered me with questions, while my mother and Stephanie sat in strange silence, Derek looking uncomfortably between them. When the celebration finally concluded around midnight, I instructed Jackson to ensure all guests received luxury gift baskets and transportation home. My father embraced me warmly, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Abby," before being ushered away by my tight-lipped mother. Stephanie lingered, clearly struggling. "So all those times we thought you couldn't afford to join vacations or contribute to family gifts. I was building this," I finished for her, gesturing to the elegant surroundings. "And I did send gifts. Substantial ones. The Hawaiian vacation for Mom and Dad's anniversary last year? The Christmas checks? All from me. Mom said those were from a distant cousin who'd had a windfall," Stephanie said, looking genuinely confused. I laughed without humor. Of course she did. Heaven forbid I be successful in a way she didn't orchestrate or approve. Derek approached, placing a hand on Stephanie's shoulder. "We should go. The car is waiting." To me, he added with apparent sincerity, "Incredible place you've built here. Truly impressive." Stephanie shot him a look I couldn't quite interpret before turning back to me. "We should talk soon." After they departed, I returned to my office, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a generous glass of the same Bordeaux we'd served at dinner. Michael knocked lightly before entering. "That was quite an evening," he said, loosening his tie. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question, swirling the wine. Relieved, vindicated, exhausted, sad. I took a sip. "All of the above. Your father seemed to come around." "He did," I acknowledged. "He's always been more reasonable than Mom or Stephanie. Just not reasonable enough to ever stand up for me." Michael nodded, understanding. "And now what happens tomorrow when the shock wears off?" That was the critical question. The revelation had been dramatic and satisfying in the moment, but I knew enough about family dynamics to recognize this was just the beginning of a complicated renegotiation. "I suspect my phone will start ringing very early tomorrow," I said. "My mother will either demand explanations or try to rewrite history, claiming she always believed in me. Stephanie will likely oscillate between resentment and attempts to capitalize on her connection to me. And you'll respond how?" I set down my glass, suddenly certain. I'm going to set boundaries. Clear, firm boundaries for the first time in my life. This isn't about revenge or gloating. It's about establishing the respect I should have had all along. Over the next 2 hours, Michael and I outlined a strategy that wasn't about punishing my family, but about protecting myself and creating the possibility of healthier relationships. I decided to consult with Dr. Eleanor Hayes, the therapist I'd been seeing, to ensure my approach was constructive. As predicted, my phone began ringing at 7:03 the next morning. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. A text from Stephanie followed. "We need to talk. Can I come by your hotel today?" I responded to neither. Instead, I called Dr. Hayes for an emergency session. By the time I arrived at her office, I had 17 missed calls, 23 texts, and an email from my father that simply read, "I owe you an apology. Many apologies. When you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen." That email, so different from my mother's demanding voicemails and Stephanie's alternately accusatory and ingratiating texts, gave me hope that at least one relationship might be salvageable. "The question isn't whether you should forgive them," Dr. Hayes said after I recounted the previous evening. "The question is what kind of relationship you want moving forward, and what boundaries need to be in place to make that relationship healthy for you." By the end of our session, I had clarity. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It wasn't even about forcing acknowledgement of past slights. It was about creating a new dynamic where my autonomy and achievements were respected. I returned to the Athena, instructing the front desk to send up any family members who might arrive unannounced. Then I sat in my penthouse, overlooking the city I'd conquered on my own terms, and finally replied to my father's email with a simple message. "I'm ready to talk. Alone. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. in my office at the Athena." It was time to reshape my family relationships as deliberately as I built my business empire. My father arrived for our meeting precisely 10 minutes early, a habit ingrained from decades of client appointments. Jackson escorted him to my office, where I'd arranged for coffee and his favorite cookies. "This is quite a view," he said, gazing out at the Minneapolis skyline. He seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than the larger-than-life figure of my childhood. "It's why I chose this office," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. I wanted to be reminded daily of what I was building. An awkward silence fell. 32 years of miscommunication and missed connections hung in the air. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "I don't know where to begin, Abigail. I'm still trying to process everything. The hotel's your success. The fact that you felt you couldn't share any of it with us." "I tried, Dad. In the beginning." I kept my voice even, determined to remain factual. "When I got my first management position, when I started my consulting firm, when I acquired this hotel, I called home each time. The responses were always the same. Dismissive at best, undermining at worst." He looked genuinely surprised. "I don't remember. When I called about my promotion to hotel manager, Mom said, 'At least it's steady work,' and immediately changed the subject to Stephanie's new apartment. When I mentioned starting my consulting business, you asked if I had a backup plan for when it fails. After a while, it seemed pointless to share my milestones." My father's face flushed with recognition and shame. "I remember now. I didn't realize. I thought we were being practical, encouraging you to be realistic. You were practical and realistic with me. You were ambitious and encouraging with Stephanie." I kept my tone matter of fact, not accusatory. Different standards, different expectations, different support. He didn't deny it, which surprised me. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Your mother and we understood Stephanie's path, the corporate ladder, the networking, the traditional markers of success. Your interests seemed so." He struggled for the word. "Unconventional." I suggested. "Yes. We worried. Perhaps we protected our own comfort by doubting yours." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. "I was wrong. We were wrong. What you've built here is extraordinary, Abigail." The acknowledgement, so simple, so overdue, hit me with unexpected force. I blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you for saying that. Your mother is struggling with all this," he continued. "She feels deceived, I think." "And Stephanie is?" He trailed off. "I imagine they both feel threatened by the disruption to the family hierarchy," I said. "But that's not actually my problem to solve." My father nodded slowly. "What happens now?" I outlined the boundaries I'd established with Dr. Hayes' guidance. I would maintain relationships with my family members individually, not as a unit. I would not attend gatherings where my achievements or lifestyle would be minimized or mocked. I would be honest about my success moving forward, but would not tolerate attempts to leverage my resources without respect for my autonomy. "That seems reasonable," my father said when I finished. "More than reasonable, given everything." I've also scheduled meetings with my attorney tomorrow to remove the anonymity from several gifts I've given the family over the years. I added. The Hawaiian vacation, the Christmas checks, the contributions to your retirement fund. His eyes widened. The extra investment returns from the past 3 years? That was you. Yes. I've been supplementing your retirement account since I sold my second hotel. I wanted you and Mom to be comfortable, but I knew she wouldn't accept direct help from me. My father looked stunned, then deeply ashamed. All this time we've been treating you like the family underachiever, and you've been quietly supporting us. I didn't do it for gratitude or recognition, I clarified. I did it because I could and because despite everything you're my family. But moving forward I want transparency. No more anonymous gifts. No more pretending to be less successful than I am. He agreed. Our conversation shifted to his birthday celebration. He genuinely enjoyed it. Once the initial shock wore off, he admitted. Your mother kept saying you must have tricked us somehow, that it couldn't possibly be your hotel. He shook his head. I told her she needed to accept the reality in front of her. That didn't go over well. After he left, promising to process everything we discussed, I spent the afternoon in back-to-back meetings with my attorney, financial advisor and therapist, solidifying my plan for restructuring family relationships. Sarah Jenkins, my attorney, helped me draft formal letters documenting past financial gifts and establishing clear parameters for any future family financial interactions. My financial advisor, Marcus Williams, reviewed my portfolio. Dr. Hayes helped me prepare psychologically for the conversations ahead, particularly with my mother, who would likely be the most resistant. By the end of the day, Operation Family Reset, as Michael jokingly called it, was fully developed. I felt prepared, centered, and for the first time when dealing with family matters, fully in control of my own narrative. I instructed Jackson to inform the front desk that my mother and sister were to be admitted if they arrived, but not given any information about my whereabouts or schedule. Sure enough, my mother appeared unannounced the following morning, clearly expecting to be immediately ushered into my presence. Mrs. Thompson, Jackson greeted her with perfect professional courtesy. Do you have an appointment with Miss Thompson today? Her indignation was visible, even on the security monitor I was watching from my office. I don't need an appointment. I'm her mother. I understand, but Miss Thompson is currently in meetings. I'd be happy to check her availability later today, or schedule something for tomorrow. The boundary, so simple, so standard for anyone else, was clearly shocking to her. After several minutes of increasingly agitated protest, she finally left, but not before informing Jackson that she would deal with Abigail directly about this ridiculous situation. She called immediately. This time I answered. Hello, Mom. What on earth is going on, Abigail? I just came to see you at this hotel of yours, and I was treated like some sort of stranger. You were treated like any other visitor without an appointment, I corrected gently. I run a business, Mom. I have meetings, responsibilities, schedules. I'm your mother. I shouldn't need an appointment to see my own daughter. Would you drop by Stephanie's law firm and expect to be immediately shown to her office? The silence on the other end told me the point had registered. This is different, she finally said, but with less conviction. It's really not. My business, my career, my professional standing. They all deserve the same respect you've always given Stephanie's. Another pause. We need to discuss what happened at your father's birthday. As a family. I'm happy to talk with you, Mom, but not until you're ready to acknowledge some uncomfortable truths about how you've treated me and my career choices over the years. This isn't about. It's exactly about that, I interrupted firmly. I'm not angry and I'm not trying to punish anyone, but I am establishing boundaries that should have been in place long ago. By the end of our conversation, we'd agreed to meet the following week with Dr. Hayes present as a mediator. It wasn't an ideal solution from my mother's perspective, but she'd recognized I was no longer the daughter who could be dismissed or manipulated. Stephanie proved more adaptable, if not more sincere. She arrived at the Athena that afternoon, Derek in tow, requesting a tour of my sister's amazing hotel. The pivot from condescension to sudden sisterly pride was transparent, but I decided to accept it as a starting point. As I showed them around, Stephanie peppered me with questions about the business, the clientele, the profit margins, clearly calculating the full extent of my success. Derek seemed genuinely impressed, asking thoughtful questions about the hospitality industry and my management philosophy. You know, Stephanie said as we concluded the tour in the rooftop garden I'd installed, we should talk about potential collaborations. The firm is always looking for impressive venues for client events, and family discount rates would be a win-win. And there it was. The true purpose of her visit. Not reconciliation, but determining how my success could benefit her. I don't offer family discount rates, I said pleasantly but firmly. The Athena maintains consistent pricing for all clients. But your firm is welcome to book through our corporate events department like any other business. Her smile faltered slightly. But surely, for your own sister. I value our relationship too much to complicate it with business entanglements, I interrupted smoothly. I've found that clear boundaries between family and business are essential for both to thrive. Derek nodded appreciatively at this, earning a sharp look from Stephanie. The rest of their visit passed uneventfully, and by the time they left, Stephanie had received the same message I delivered to our parents. I was open to a relationship, but only one based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. That evening, I had dinner with Michael in my penthouse, recounting the day's interactions. Phase 1 complete, he said, raising his glass. How does it feel? Like I'm finally the author of my own story, I considered, instead of a secondary character in someone else's. The challenging family meeting with my mother still lay ahead, but for the first time I felt fully prepared. This wasn't about revenge for years of dismissal. It was about reclaiming my narrative and establishing the respect that should have been there all along. Sometimes, I reflected, the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't proving others wrong. It's living your truth so completely that their opinion becomes irrelevant. The family meeting with my mother took place in a neutral setting, a private conference room at Dr. Hayes' office building. My mother arrived 15 minutes early, dressed for battle in a tailored navy suit, her posture rigid with defensive energy. My father arrived 5 minutes later, nodding to me with cautious optimism. Dr. Hayes welcomed us, establishing ground rules. No interrupting, no personal attacks, and a focus on I statements. We're here to establish healthier communication patterns, Dr. Hayes explained, not to assign blame or revisit every past grievance. My mother's skeptical expression made it clear she viewed this as psychobabble, but she nodded agreement nonetheless. I began, calmly, speaking about my experience as the less favored child, the dismissal of my career choices, the constant minimization of my achievements compared to Stephanie's. I gave specific examples factually without emotion. While I was working 3 jobs to put myself through college, I said, you paid Stephanie's full tuition and housing at Cornell. When I landed my first management position, you changed the subject to Stephanie's new apartment. When I called to share that I'd started my own consulting firm, Dad asked if I had a backup plan for when it failed. My mother's face flushed as I continued, her hands clasping and unclasping in her lap. When I finished, Dr. Hayes turned to her. Diana, would you like to respond? My mother straightened, her voice tightly controlled. I think there have been some misinterpretations of our intentions. We've always wanted what's best for both our daughters. Perhaps we expressed more concern about Abigail's choices because they seemed riskier, less conventional. The concern wasn't the issue, I clarified. It was the assumption of failure, the lack of support, the constant comparison to Stephanie's more appropriate path. We supported you. My mother's composure cracked slightly. We gave you a good home, a good education through high school. My father interjected quietly. We did make Abigail pay her own way through college while covering everything for Stephanie. My mother turned to him, betrayal evident in her expression. That was different. Stephanie was at an Ivy League school. The expenses were much higher. All the more reason I might have needed help, I pointed out. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. My mother, alternately defensive and dismissive. My father, increasingly reflective and acknowledging. And me remaining steady in my perspective while open to theirs. Dr. Hayes guided us skillfully, preventing derailments, keeping us focused on moving forward. The breaking point came when my mother finally voiced her core grievance. Why did you hide your success from us? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to learn about your hotels in front of all our friends? To realize our daughter has been lying to us for years. I wasn't lying, I replied evenly. I simply stopped sharing. There's a difference. But why? She pressed, genuine confusion breaking through her anger. Because every time I did share, you diminished it. After years of that, it became clear that my success didn't fit the narrative you had created about who I was and what I was capable of. It was less painful to keep it to myself than to have it consistently devalued. Something in my measured response finally penetrated. My mother fell silent, her gaze dropping to her hands. I never thought of it that way, she said finally, her voice uncharacteristically small. I always saw myself as the practical one, the realist, keeping everyone's feet on the ground. For Stephanie, you were her cheerleader. For me, you were the voice of caution and doubt, I said gently. Both daughters needed both responses at different times. My father reached for my mother's hand, squeezing it gently. She's right, Diana. We've treated them differently from the beginning. We've expected Abigail to fail, and Stephanie to succeed. And both have fulfilled our expectations. Stephanie by following our approved path, and Abigail by succeeding despite our lack of faith in her. The admission, so simple, so profound, hung in the air. My mother's eyes filled with tears, something I'd rarely witnessed. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. It starts with acknowledgement, Dr. Hayes offered, which you've begun today, and it continues with new patterns of interaction moving forward. We spent the next hour outlining these patterns. My parents would respect my professional boundaries, acknowledge my achievements without qualification, and cease comparing my path to Stephanie's. I would maintain honesty about my life and success. We would build a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than outdated roles. And Stephanie? My mother asked eventually. She's struggling with all this too. My relationship with Stephanie is separate, I explained. We'll need to find our own path forward. As the session concluded, Dr. Hayes suggested we take a week to process everything. My father hugged me warmly. My mother, after a moment's hesitation, approached cautiously. Your hotel is beautiful, she said, the compliment clearly difficult for her. I'd like to understand more about what you've built, if you're willing to share. It was a small step but a significant one. I'd like that, I replied. 3 days later, Stephanie requested a meeting alone, without Derek or our parents. We met at a small cafe equidistant between her law firm and the Athena neutral territory for a conversation that proved more challenging than the one with our parents. I don't understand why you're doing this, she began without preamble. Creating all this family drama, making mom and dad feel terrible. I'm not doing anything to them, I replied calmly. I'm simply establishing honest, respectful relationships after years of the opposite. They've always supported us. They've always supported you, I corrected. There's a difference. Stephanie's expression shifted from indignation to uncertainty. I never asked to be the favorite. I know, but you never questioned it either. I kept my tone matter of fact. When they praised your conventional choices while dismissing my entrepreneurial ones, when they funded your education while making me work 3 jobs, when they celebrated your achievements while minimizing mine, you accepted it as the natural order of things. She fell silent, stirring her latte with uncharacteristic intensity. I didn't realize how different things were for you, she finally admitted. From my perspective, you always seemed so independent, like you didn't need anyone's approval or help. I became independent because I had to be, I explained. And then that independence was used against me as proof. I didn't need the support you automatically received. Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, more honest than any we'd had in our adult lives. Unlike our parents, Stephanie never fully acknowledged her role in the family dynamic. But she did express a tentative willingness to establish a more equitable relationship. I can't promise I'll get it right immediately, she said as we prepared to leave. Old habits and all that. I'm not expecting perfection, I assured her. Just effort and awareness. The following week brought a series of small but significant shifts. My father called to ask detailed questions about my business model, genuinely interested. My mother sent a handwritten note apologizing for her reaction at the birthday dinner and requesting a proper tour of the Athena when you have time in your schedule. Stephanie texted about meeting for lunch without any ulterior motive of business connections. Michael observed these changes with measured optimism. Family dynamics don't transform overnight, he cautioned. There will be backsliding, old patterns reasserting themselves. I know, I acknowledged. But for the first time I feel like they're seeing me. The real me. Not the version that fits their predetermined narrative. And if they revert to type? He asked, ever the pragmatist. Then I maintain my boundaries, I said with newfound certainty. The difference now is that I've made those boundaries explicit. So crossing them becomes a choice, rather than an unconscious habit. The true test came a month later when my mother organized a family dinner at their home, the first since my father's birthday revelation. I arrived prepared for potential regression, but was pleasantly surprised. My mother had placed several framed articles about me and my hotels on the living room wall, alongside Stephanie's law school diploma and firm partnership announcement. My father asked for my opinion on a potential investment opportunity, valuing my business acumen in a way he never had. Even Stephanie made an effort, mentioning a client who had stayed at the Athena and raved about the experience. The most telling moment came during dessert. My mother mentioned a fundraising gala she was helping organize. We'd love to have your support, Abigail, she said. Then, catching herself, added, not because of your resources, but because it's a cause I think would interest you given your involvement with women's entrepreneurship programs. It was a small adjustment in language, but it represented a significant shift in perception, acknowledging my philanthropic interests, rather than just my financial capacity, seeing me as a person with values and priorities, not merely a resource to be tapped. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey. The revelation at my father's birthday dinner had been dramatic, even theatrical, but the real work had happened in the quieter moments afterward. The honest conversations, the established boundaries, the gradual rebuilding of relationships on more authentic foundations. The revenge I'd initially contemplated after years of dismissal had transformed into something far more valuable: genuine recognition and respect. Not because I owned luxury hotels or had achieved financial success, but because I had finally demanded acknowledgement of my worth beyond those external markers. The family dynamics weren't perfect, nor would they ever be. But they had shifted from automatic dismissal to conscious effort. And in family relationships, that movement represented a revolution. As I entered my penthouse that night, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The view of Minneapolis spread before me, lights twinkling against the night sky, a visual reminder of all I had built, despite the doubts and dismissals. Some might say living well is the best revenge. But I had discovered something more powerful. Living authentically is the best resolution. 6 months after the revelations, I stood on my penthouse balcony, watching the sun set over Minneapolis. The city glowed golden, a beautiful backdrop for reflecting on how dramatically my family relationships had transformed. The changes hadn't been instantaneous or seamless. There had been setbacks, moments when my mother slipped into old patterns, when Stephanie's competitive nature resurfaced. But the difference now was that these instances were recognized, addressed, and corrected. My relationship with my father had improved the most significantly. Free from my mother's stronger personality, he now visited the Athena regularly, genuinely curious about my operations. He'd even started offering accounting advice, not with patronizing tones, but with professional respect. "I never gave you enough credit," he admitted during one of our monthly lunch meetings. "I was so focused on traditional paths that I couldn't recognize you were pioneering a better one." My mother's transformation was more measured but still meaningful. She no longer dismissed my career. While I sometimes caught her struggling to fully comprehend the scope of what I'd built, the critical difference was her willingness to try, to ask questions, to visit my properties with genuine interest rather than skepticism. "I've been recommending the Athena to everyone at the country club," she told me proudly during a recent call. Cynthia Blackwell was positively envious when I mentioned my daughter owns it. There was still an element of vicarious pride in her support, but I'd come to accept that perfect understanding might be beyond our reach. The improvement from dismissal to imperfect support represented significant progress. Stephanie and I had established a more honest, if sometimes awkward, relationship. The competitive dynamic hadn't disappeared entirely, but acknowledging it had diminished its power. We'd even collaborated on a charity event hosted at the Athena, combining her legal connections with my hospitality expertise. A partnership that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "We make a good team when we're not trying to outdo each other," she'd observed after the successful fundraiser. "We always could have," I'd replied. "We just never gave ourselves the chance." Beyond family, my professional life continued to flourish. I'd acquired 2 additional properties in 6 months, expanding my portfolio to 9 luxury hotels. Michael had been promoted to Chief Operations Officer. And perhaps most significantly, I'd established the Thompson Women in Hospitality Foundation, providing scholarships and mentorship to young women pursuing careers in the industry. "You're creating the support system you never had," Dr. Hayes observed, turning personal disappointment into structural change. I agreed. It feels more constructive than just being angry about the past. My personal life had evolved as well. After years of prioritizing my career, I'd begun dating James Bennett, an architectural restoration specialist I'd met during the renovation of my Chicago property. Unlike previous relationships, James understood the demands of building something meaningful. "Balance isn't about equal time," he'd said. "It's about equal respect for what matters to each person." That philosophy allowed our relationship to flourish alongside my business. As the sun disappeared, I heard the penthouse door open. "Michael, arriving for our weekly strategy dinner. Contemplating your empire?" he asked, joining me on the balcony with 2 glasses of wine. "Contemplating the journey," I corrected, accepting the glass. "Professional and personal. Any regrets about how it all unfolded?" he asked. The dramatic revelation rather than a quieter approach? I considered this carefully. I think the drama was necessary. My family had spent decades comfortably dismissing me. Comfort needed to be disrupted before real change could begin. Michael nodded. Speaking of family, your mother called the front desk today. She actually made an appointment to see you next week, rather than demanding immediate access. I laughed. Progress comes in many forms. Later that evening, after reviewing expansion plans, I checked my email to find a message from my father. He'd attached an article about female entrepreneurs in hospitality that had featured me prominently. So proud of what you've built, his message read. Not just the hotels, but the foundation, the mentorship programs, all of it. You've created success on your own terms, which is far more impressive than following someone else's blueprint. Stephanie and I were talking yesterday about how your approach to business has inspired her to consider more creative directions in her legal career. You've influenced all of us more than you know. The message brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from sadness or lingering hurt, but from the simple power of finally being seen and valued for exactly who I was. The truth I discovered over these months was that revenge, in its traditional sense, had never been what I truly wanted. The fantasy of making my family regret their dismissal had been satisfying in the abstract, but the reality of building healthier relationships had proven far more fulfilling than any moment of vindication. What I'd really sought wasn't their regret, but their recognition, not of my material success, but of my worth as an individual with valid choices and achievements. That recognition had finally come, imperfectly but genuinely, not because I'd forced it through dramatic revelation, but because I'd created space for it through honest communication and firm boundaries. The greatest revenge against those who underestimate you isn't making them sorry. It's making their opinion irrelevant to your sense of self-worth. My family's validation, now freely given, was welcome, but no longer necessary. I had built that validation from within, brick by brick, alongside the hotels that stood as physical manifestations of my vision and determination. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the young women in my foundation program, many of whom faced their own struggles with doubt and dismissal. The most valuable thing I could offer them wasn't just financial support or professional connections, but the understanding that other people's limitations should never become their own. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? How did you respond, with anger, withdrawal, or determination to prove them wrong? Drop a comment below with your experience. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from our most painful experiences, and I'm grateful to each of you for allowing me to share mine. Until next time, remember that true success isn't measured by others' recognition, but by the life you build on your own terms.